So on one of our last swivel knife challenges, the Artsy Pixie said, hey, can I get a beginner challenge? Something like a 4-leaf clover or maybe a heart? Yep, that's coming up. Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Reach. This is Weaver Leather Supply. Today, we're going to be taking that suggestion from the Artsy Pixie and we're going to do a very entry-level kind of beginner style swivel knife challenge. And we're going to take that opportunity to teach some of the beginner techniques, some of those fundamentals that you need to know to really get the hang of a swivel knife. First thing that we're going to be doing is adding a tooling window, and a tooling window is simply the frame that goes around the outside of the project. Now, the reason we want to put this in first is because it gives us an idea of how the project is going to fit within our within the frame that we've created. So, you know, it's not one of those things that's absolutely necessary, but what if your project's a little bit too big for the area that you're working in? Well, by putting the tooling window in first, you can leave those little bits out so that it looks like it kind of gets tucked under the tooling window. It's just a good idea to put the tooling window in before you trace in your pattern. Now, how do we actually put the tooling window in? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to use our wing dividers, which seems to have disappeared. Found them. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the wing dividers to put that tooling window in. So I'm going to be holding my wing dividers like this. So I hold it in place with my thumb. It rests against these two fingers right here so that I can put some downward pressure on it. And generally I want the little screw that sticks out to the side, I want that sticking out over my thumb. It's just more comfortable that way and it doesn't bump into the table. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop that outside tine off the edge of the leather, and then I'm going to score in that line with my wing dividers. And the important part is that we want to keep our eye on the tine that's dropped off the leather, because that's what's going to guide the other one. We don't want to watch the one that's making the mark. We want to watch the one that's running along the side of the leather. So one thing I should have mentioned is before we put that tooling window in, we want to case our leather. Casing leather is simply the process of adding moisture to the leather so that it will take the stamps, it will leave burnish, that kind of thing. If you need more information on how to properly case leather, we've done a video on that. We'll leave a link in the description. But we want to case the leather before we put the tooling window on, because it'll make it a lot easier to actually see the score mark that the wing dividers leave. Next, we're going to want to transfer that image to the leather. And this right here is the pattern that we're going to be working with. And you'll notice that within the 4-leaf clover, there's a lot of veins and lines in there. You don't necessarily have to put all those in. I'm not going to for this particular challenge, but if you wanted to, you could. Now, how are we going to transfer the image to the leather? Well, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to grab some tracing film, and Weaver has some of the best tracing film that I've ever used. It's thick enough that it's not floppy, and it's durable, so it can be used more than once, but it's still transparent enough that it's very easy to transfer the image, to trace the image onto the tracing paper. Once we've got it traced, then we can tape it down to the leather and go over it again with our pencil or our stylus, and because the leather is cased, it will transfer that image to the leather. Now, one thing I do want to mention while you watch me trace that in is the fact that I'm using a very low tack tape. Now, when I say low tack, it just means it's not very sticky. It's basically really cheap tape that doesn't stick very well, which means it works perfectly for taping your pattern to the leather. It doesn't leave a mark. Now, ordinarily, I would not suggest that you tape your pattern to the face of your leather, because most of the time it's either going to leave residue or a mark. But I'm using this really cheap tape that has very little tack, so I can get away with it, where most of the time I wouldn't suggest you do that. So we can finally go ahead and get out our swivel knife. But before we start cutting in the pattern, we need to make sure that we strop that blade. A good general rule is that you want to strop your blade every time you pick it up. Now, if you need more information on how to strop your blade, we've got a video on it. So we'll put a link in the description. That way you can jump over there, watch that, and we can go ahead and jump into cutting in the pattern. So if you're brand new at this, a couple of things that I want to mention as we start cutting in the pattern here. Number one, we want a nice deep cut. And nice deep cut simply means we want to cut about 1/3 of the way into the leather. More than that's not really going to help us. It can hurt us. And less than that's going to prevent us from beveling correctly. So we want about 1/3 of the way through the leather on these outside cuts. The other thing that I want to mention is that we want to start deep and pull towards the taper. Now, what I mean by that is the end of the cut should fade out into nothing. The easiest way to do that is that we're going to start in each one of these leaves is shaped like a heart. Well, if we start in the point at the top and we go up and around and then we fade that cut out as we get to the center of the clover, that's what we're looking for. So start at the top, come up and around, and fade that cut as you get to the center of the clover. So if you notice that your blade is starting to stutter or drag as you're pulling it through the leather, that generally means two things. One, it can mean three things. It can be, number one, you're working with an economy leather. If you're getting your leather from Weaver, you don't have to worry about that. You'll be good. Number two, it can mean that your leather needs more moisture. As it dries out, your blade is going to drag and stutter. The other thing that it can mean is that you need to strop your blade more. The more dull the blade is, the worse it's going to cut. Once we get the stem and the outside leaves cut in, we can move to those inner veins on the inside of the leaf. Now, these cuts on the veins are going to be a lot more shallow than those outside cuts are. These veins are almost more of a decorative cut. So yes, we want to get a nice cut in there, but at the same time, we don't want it quite as deep as we did on the outside of the leaf. Now that we got everything cut in, we can go ahead and move over to our modeling tools. Now, ordinarily, you would see me using a modeling spoon to develop the shadows on these swivel knife challenges. But today I thought we'd switch it up a little bit. We're going to be using a ball stylus. Essentially, it's a pencil with a ball on each end of it. We've got a medium and a large on here. They get bigger than this, but this is a good one for this challenge. So what we're going to be doing is we're simply going to be tracing in those lines with the ball stylus. Now, if we go over it multiple times and we go slow, we can develop the depth and the burnish over time, and it's going to be a lot easier to control. So take your time, go slow, and just trace in those lines and start to develop the shape that we're looking for. Once we get the shadows worked in with the ball stylus, we can switch back over to our modeling spoon. And this time, I'm going to use it a little differently. One thing that I'm going to be doing with it is I'm going to soften and fade those shadows that we just created with the ball stylus. But the other thing that we're going to do, this is a little bit different than what we've done in the past. I'm going to use this to create a shadow around the outside of the 4-leaf clover. Now, I want to point out, as you watch me do it, I'm not compressing the background. I'm not creating a shadow outside the 4-leaf clover. I'm creating a shadow on the 4-leaf clover. So this is actually tracing along the stem and the petals, not the background surrounding it. So we're actually starting to get some depth and some shape and some color and some shadow to the project, but the leaf still needs something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in with the pointed end of my modeling spoon, and I'm going to widen those cuts that we put in for the veins. That's going to open it up, make them a little bit more bold. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to trace in a few lines with the tip of my modeling spoon, and that's just going to give us a few more veins in there that are going to be more subtle than the ones that we cut in. So the center of the 4-leaf clover looks a little empty. So, I know there's not really a flower center to the center of a 4-leaf clover, but it needs something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a cedar stamp and I'm going to put a single seed right in the middle of it. Then I'm going to use my modeling spoon to kind of blend in the edges of that cedar so that, it looks like it's supposed to be there, even though we all know that's not in the middle of a 4-leaf clover. So something I want to point out while I'm developing those shadows around the cedar, that is that I'm shadows the direction I want them to go. It's like a pencil. The direction of your pencil stroke will guide your eye and suggest the contour to whatever it is that you're drawing. The shadows in this situation are exactly the same. We want our modeling tool to pull and drag those shadows the direction we want them to go. So that's going to do it for the beginner level swivel knife challenge. I hope you found it helpful. That's going to do it for this video. I will see you in the next one. In the meantime, go make something amazing.